All right, we're live. Hey,
That was
um,
quick.
if you can spell it. Um, so, as usual, let's start with introductions. I'm going to start at my left with a newbie on the show, Gary.
Hey guys, I'm Carrie Dills. I'm proud to be a newbie on the show. Thanks for having me. And yeah, I do WordPress themes for the Genesis framework that are accessible.
Awesome. Another newbie on the show, Jordan.
Thanks for having me on. This is my first time doing a podcast, period, so I'm pretty excited. Based out of Toronto, WordPress development, website development, and I do a lot of advocacy for local accessibility groups as well.
Awesome. Matt.
I'm Matt Cromwell. I'm head of support at WordPress. We built the Give donation plugin and just released Maps Builder Pro. And I'm sure both of them are terrible with accessibility. I'm certain. So these are all here to tell me what to do and tell me what I did wrong. So.
All right, Mike.
Mike Corkum. I'm senior web developer at Carleton University in Ottawa, Canada.
And Rachel.
Hi, I'm Rachel Carden. I am a web designer and developer at the University of Alabama.
Cool, and as usual, I'm Roy, and I work at Disney as a WordPress developer, and I don't know how to spell accessibility, let alone use it, so I'm excited for this talk. So we have kind of a broad range of people, so I asked Rachel and Mike to be on, because I know that you guys are in higher education, granted two different countries, but both dealing with higher education. So maybe I can just start off with a broad question for the group: is what is accessibility? Like, as we were kind of joking around before the show, we were saying, well, when someone asks me if my website's accessible, I load it up on my phone and I say, yep, it's accessible. It's not offline. So that's probably not the right definition of accessibility. So, Carrie, why don't you start? What's your high-level definition for someone who's just getting into it?
Content that is readable or consumable regardless of the device being used to consume it.
Okay. Anyone have anything to add to that? I think that's a pretty clear base understanding.
I mean, what you could do is think about web accessibility like the middleman between a website and assistive technology. So some people, they don't use the standard keyboard and mouse setup. They may have something like a screen reader or something like another type of device. And the web accessibility components basically ensure that no matter what assistive technology or what other device you plan on using, it's still going to work and function exactly the same way. So it's really the middleman between a device and website, essentially, in my opinion, to sum it up.
Wow, thanks for taking what I said and just making it sound a whole lot better.
But it also, I mean, it encompasses a lot of different people. I try to tell people encouraging to be. We want our content to be viewable by all users, no matter what possible disabilities they might have. And the obvious, or the kind of the big example is like screen readers for people that are blind. But there's also people that are colorblind, and so a section of accessibility has to do with just like color contrast. Some people can't see certain colors, and so something like one accessibility practice or is just the notion of links. So like in the web world, links are generally underlined, and that denotes a link. But let's say on your website, your links aren't underlined, and they're only a certain color, and that's what you use to denote links. If someone is, say, colorblind to that specific color, like red or blue, they can't tell it's a link. And so these are, just little details and aspects to consider when designing your website and, building your content. And so just there you go.
I've never actually physically seen a screen reader device, and in the back of my mind, I'm like, there's also got to be like screen reader wars, just like there are browser wars. Like, isn't there something like that? Isn't it like, oh, it reads great on this, but on this one it sucks? And I mean, that's got to be a lot of not fun.
Yeah, is there like an IE of screen readers where damn this one screen reader?
I really only played around with the one that comes on Chrome, or there's a Chrome extension that I use. I would highly recommend that everyone, download a screen reader and use it on some sites so you can get a feel for what it's like to navigate using a screen reader and the effect that so that the effect or the experience that blind people have visiting your website. It can be pretty bad sometimes.
Yeah, I was just gonna say something along the same lines there. When I first started doing accessible development, I was using JAWS to go through some websites, and it is really, really difficult. And it almost inspired me to be like, I want to make this a better experience because this is incredibly frustrating and incredibly difficult. So yeah. JAWS is, to sum it up, JAWS is the one that I've used the most.
Can you link to it in the in either the group chat and I'll put it out there, or if you go to the podcast page, just link to it. So, all right. So now that we have an understanding of what accessibility is, how does it play a role? I would think is the next kind of thing. And just like every project, I know that accessibility can start from the design phase. So what are some things that you guys, I guess, look for in the designs before you start developing anything? What are some important things to look for to do when you're designing out a new project, new website, whatever?
I think Rachel touched on some of them, like designing to, planning on having underline linked and so forth, but your color palette, there should be really good contrast between your foreground and background so that text is easily readable, and also your text should be sufficiently contrasted against your regular color. Say you've got black text in a blue link or a red link or whatever, so that if a colorblind user is looking at that the link stands out from the regular copy.
There's some great browser plugins, and I believe there's even some plugins for Photoshop and Sketch that analyze the different color contrasts.
There's a Google Chrome extension called No Coffee. That's the most popular one that I've seen. It's actually a really, really awesome tool. You can plug it in, and any site that you go to, you can switch different colorblind modes. So you're apparently colorblindness has a spectrum, so you can easily switch through the different variations. And so I think the idea with design is not only do you want to pick colors that are contrasting, but your UI should also not be color dependent, kind of like what I believe Carrie was saying, where let's say you have a heading that says click on the red or blue button. If somebody's colorblind, all they're going to see is gray, and so you can't really depend on either your communication or design to be dependent on that color or any type of color specifically when working with UI, especially.
Did you say it was called No Coffee?
I believe it's called No Coffee. I could double check right now.
That's got to be the worst marketing scheme ever. Might as well like hell on earth. Don't use this extension.
Yeah, No Coffee.
It is No Coffee.
Oh my god!
What a weird name.
I will post it.
So, are there anything else for UI-wise, like going into design pre-development, that designers or maybe even developers should see before they start coding, as far as accessibility goes? Because screen readers, yes, one thing. I know the contrast thing, but anything else that might be worth looking at as far as from a design point of view when building on a new project, making sure that it's accessible from the ground up?
You can talk about the structure of the content.
Yeah.
Make sure that the heading order makes sense, and the order, consider the reading order and the way that people are going to read the content and go through it.
So do screen readers read DOM like the way it is in the DOM, like before CSS and all that. So if you have what is it, flex content or something that pushes something up, it will read the one that's below first because that's first in the DOM technically.
That's a good question.
Yeah, I believe I believe that it's for the most part. I think it may depend on the screen reader, but I think for the most part, it's the order in which it is in the DOM. I believe.
Okay, so content does play a big role in accessibility, like heading tags, things like that as well. Will screen
Absolutely.
readers catch that kind of stuff?
Yes, so screen readers can be, depending on how you use your H1, H2 headings, it's kind of used as a pseudo navigation. So the screen reader knows, big chunks or big blocks of content versus sub blocks of content, and so you can, be utilizing those headings for structural purposes. For overall for any type of assistive technology. That's kind of how it works. It's more of a navigational type tool, I suppose. So when the screen reader is going through the order of what it's reading out, it knows, it kind of has an idea of where it's going or where it's at, essentially.
And a tool that a lot of people will implement that can be helpful for screen readers is like essentially a hidden button at the top of your page that allows the screen reader to skip to the content. And so, in other words, not read over the headers or the menus and all that stuff, and just go straight to the the body copy. So that's always really helpful to implement.
Mm.
What about
For normal people too, I think that'd be useful. I mean, they're all normal people. That was bad. They're all normal people. Let me say that again. They are all normal people.
Don't worry, Matt. There's a 30-second delay on this.
I'm never going live ever again. I have to be edited.
In 30 seconds, your Twitter's going to explode.
And something else that I think all of web is moving away from this anyway, but also like having really I guess descriptive links and not stuff like click here. And I would hope that most of web is kind of going away from the click here links anyway, because those are just silly. But instead of saying click here, have it be like read this policy or whatever. Just ensuring that the link text, it makes sense. It can stand on its own, because otherwise all the screen reader is going to read is click here, and the user is not going to have any idea what click here means or where they're going.
Absolutely. I think in with most default WordPress blogs, you get a lot of read more. So a lot of the times all we do is just add the title. So read more, whatever the title of the blog is. So at least exactly what Rachel was saying, it can stand on its own leg within context. It's not just a bunch of read more, click more, view more ideas. So that itself is a really easy fix. As long as you can add some title or description to that link, at least you're telling people where they're going.
There's actually a great plugin called WP Accessible that you can just check a box and it'll automatically add. So like it'll say read more and then have the post title, and that's hidden for visual users, but for screen text readers, it shows the post title, so it's kind of cool. You can also just check a box and have it create, I believe, skip links for you.
What was the name of the plugin?
WP Accessible. I believe Joe Dolson is the.
All right, I'll take a look at that. Yeah, I was gonna say it just seems kind of weird because back to like the click here text. With nowadays, with all the link bait out there, I wonder what people actually end up reading. Just like, you won't believe what happens next. Like every single link.
Something you can't do with markup is that you can basically have two versions. You can have what's viewable, and then you can have what's read by a screen reader. And so you can implement that sometimes, which can be really helpful if what you, I guess, want to display or what you want to put there you want the screen reader to read more, or whatever. That can come in handy sometimes.
Also, I think it's actually a WCAG error to have the same text on a page linking to different URLs. Like if you have read more, read more, read more, read more, but each read more is going to a different URL. I'm pretty sure that's actually a WCAG violation. I can't remember the name of it. I've been trying to look it up.
When you evaluate, I'm pretty sure it's the web. I think when you evaluate with the web aim tool, it points that out for you and tells you. So yeah, that makes sense.
So that's actually a pretty common templating error to have, like as Jordan was like, read more or next or whatever. It's not descriptive enough.
Sometimes using these tools can just help you find bugs, because that's pretty much, I was using the web aim tool to like evaluate a site I just launched, and it was like, you have these links that the name points somewhere different, and it wasn't supposed to be doing that. It was a bug on my part, so I went in and fixed it. There we go. So sometimes they can be helpful for more than just.
You said WebAIM was the tool?
Yes, if you go to webaim.org, there's a lot of information there, but they have an evaluation tool. There's a link in their footer.
I think it's wave.webaim.org.
Yeah.
They also have a Google Chrome extension, which I find a lot more easier to use, because the only problem with the web-based version is you couldn't be able to test things like anything that requires a login, like a WordPress backend page. Whereas with the Chrome extension, you can pretty much evaluate any page, front end, back end, wherever you are. So it's a little bit more flexible in that regard. But
and I think the extension actually, correct me if I'm wrong, Jordan, I've only used it a couple times because we use a different tool, but I believe the extension actually puts markers on the screen showing you where the error is.
Yep. So it basically plots little points of where the issues are, and it comes with a recommendation on how to fix it. So it's a pretty full-circled solution. As long as you can figure out where to find it in the code, you can easily fix whatever they kind of pop up.
So now that we've talked a lot, we've kind of touched on development a little bit, but so let's talk a little bit more about that, because that's one area where I honestly get lost, because I'm a developer by trade, so I spend a lot of time coding. I've been to accessibility talks. I think I've seen a couple of Jordan's actually, and sometimes they just don't get deep enough into the code, so I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to be doing and not what I'm like. Maybe really high-level stuff like heading tags, fine, I do that anyway. But what are some things that maybe aren't so well known, I guess? So some of the tricks, yes, the read more links, the next links. But what are some other tricks when you're coding a website to make it more accessible?
I mean, we were just to repeat what we were saying before the call. When I was first learning how to write accessible code, there is an open source project by the government of Canada, yay Canada, that is just sort of like a baseline, almost boilerplate example of accessible markup. It's called the WET toolkit, or the Web Experience Toolkit. You can Google it. There's a GitHub, but it's just I think it's a really good example. If you want to start coding, you can just sort of look at how to do it properly. It's a good example of it.
Are Canadians accessible in different ways than American? Do we need like a US wet toolkit? But different countries do have different standards, though. That's what I'm getting at while trying to be funny. There are different standards, right?
Well, the WCAG is pretty much, from what I understand, isn't really different in the US or Canada. It's all pretty much standardized. But every, like AODA, which is an Ontario-based legislation, versus Section 508, generally are just cross-referencing with WCAG 2.0 guidelines, which are pretty standard. I believe they use them, Europe, all over the world. From what I gather, it's pretty much all the same standardized guidelines. Which makes sense. I mean, if accessibility was different by country, that wouldn't really be all that accessible, would it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's talk about the web in general. I mean, it just seems like the accessibility folks are like eons ahead of the W3 consortium and everything. So. I mean, if you got it like synthesized across so many countries, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's interesting, and especially because in the U.S. only I think education right now is mandated. Like it's only required to be accessible in the education realm, but large companies who service many, many millions of people might not need to be accessible, like as far as requirement requirements from the government go. While it seems like in other places it might be a little bit more so. Accessibility seems to be a little bit more part of just everyday life and culture, I guess, in a way. I've seen some of the European things that are going on, and it seems like a lot of them have accessibility in mind almost no matter what. While here it's like, all right, education seems to be the only one that's really mandated to be accessible, and I'm not even sure how strict it is in education compared to, let's say, other parts of the world.
I mean, I think you'll find in general that the three bigger industries that are probably going to embrace accessibility sooner than others would definitely be education, medicine, and government-based sites. You're probably going to see that, you know, those industries embrace it a little bit sooner, or more so than others. We're finding that in Canada, at least for the most part, at least from my experience.
So going back to the dev question, what other things? So I mean, like alt tags, are those part of accessibility as much as they used to be, or is it? Are there other things that might play a role that don't anymore?
Alt tags +1. Kind of think about it, and this is more maybe about writing content than developing code. But things that are good for SEO are also things that are great for accessibility. So we already talked about heading tags and having those in the correct order, nested order. About like alt tags, for instance, use that to describe what's in the photo. Actually, was talking with a fellow developer who is blind, and she was telling me that she enjoys looking at photos. And the comment kind of struck me as a little bit odd, but she went on to explain, like, you're flipping through and you're reading all the alt tags for these images, and it's not, like image 356.jpg. If that is your file name, whatever, but you have an alt tag that's like, this is a kid splashing in a pool in the park. It creates a much better visual for people that can't actually see the image. And Google, of course, can't see your image, so that's why it's good for SEO as well.
I feel like it's kind of a pain sometimes, though, with the alt tags with WordPress, because isn't it? I know the title is easy to change when you're inserting an image, but the alt tag you actually have to go into like the editor to change the alt tag. So it makes no sense that it's it makes no sense that it's so hard to change when it's so important. I think they should change that up.
It can be,
so what about like
sometimes a little confusing in develop, like if you have like a decorative image, something that's just some swirls or something that doesn't really matter and doesn't need to be described. Look at these pretty swirls. In order to pass accessibility evaluation, you have to have an alt tag, but they just tell you to leave it blank. And so that's another kind of nuanced thing. Is it's kind of weird, but so you have to put in these blank alt tags.
Well, if they say that if an image doesn't have any relevance to the content, you generally don't need an alt tag. So yeah, like a pretty butterfly that you put in your header just because you like butterflies probably doesn't need an alt tag because it doesn't really have any relevance to your content. But otherwise, you're basically trying to paint a picture for somebody that can't see. But at the same time, you don't need to. That going overboard can actually be counterproductive as well.
The swirls could be just considered clutter on a screen reader. They don't need to know that there's swirls. Who cares? I had this website where we had these little decorative puzzle pieces, and it's like, we use them because we use them, but I'm not going to put an alt tag that says, look at this puzzle piece.
What does the screen reader actually say if it's an image that has an alt tag that's blank?
I believe that's specifically used so that the screen reader
Skips
will
it.
bypass
Skip
that.
it.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the format for them for the screen reader to skip that particular image.
So
Right.
what's the ideal methodology for logos? Because I know a lot of people use images in their for logos, and then they'll throw the H1 tag around their logo, right? Like in the header, they'll have H1, and sometimes you'll see an A tag and then an image tag. Sometimes you'll see an A tag with the text indent like -9,000, and then like a background image. So which one is the preferred? Like, what's the preferred method of having your logo and making it screen readable and accessible?
Well, I was going to point out that I was sitting here scanning this website, and we touched on. You asked earlier, I guess, if screen readers take CSS into decision making time, and basically, I guess some kind of like best practices on like hiding text just for screen readers. So, like, say if you had an image logo and you had the H1, that is also the name of the your company name, and then the logo was your company name. And you needed the H1, and so, but you needed it for screen readers. A lot of people their first instinct might be to just do CSS and just display none or something and hide the H1. But then actually screen readers, they don't, if it's hidden with a display none, most of the time they don't see it either. And so that's why you'll see a lot of people that will do text indent -9999 bajillion, and with zero, height 0, or whatever, because display-wise, it hides the H1, but it can still be read by the screen reader.
I'm not sure exactly which one is better, but using CSS to clip versus the text indent is supposedly a little bit more accessibility friendly.
Yeah, this page talks about both options. So there, like with most things in the web, there are multiple ways to get the job done.
Actually, we've actually just been recently treating logos instead of images as links, and then attaching the image to that link. So we just use like ahref, attach whatever logo it is, so that it's, and generally even in the link text, we're telling people like this is a link to the home page. So instead of treating it as an image with an alt tag, we treat it as a link with link text, and we found that to actually be somewhat effective.
Okay, so before we wrap up here, now that this is out there and people are now listening and they're going to go, oh my god, my website needs to be accessible like right now, what are some like quick things that a developer or a team can do without overhauling their whole website? Let's say they're planning on doing a full rebuild and they know their design's not up to spec, but what are some quick things that they can do to make their website even a little bit more accessible for temporary reasons?
I'd say the first thing you could do is just run it through like a checker or the Wave tool, and install the browser extension that Jordan mentioned, and just do a quick scan. It'll give you a whole bunch of quick wins that you could fix pretty easily. A lot of accessibility errors are pretty minor changes in markup that you can fix pretty quickly.
Especially if you're using like a template, which most people use. A lot of stuff, it's like you fix it one time in your template and it's going to fix it on all your pages. So those are really quick things you can do. Stuff that's like buried in your content, you have to go through a million posts to tweak. That's a whole other story. But stuff that's like in your header and your footer and all this stuff that are really quick, definitely check that stuff out.
Yeah, I think running an evaluation on a website or a web page is definitely the first way to go about it. I use a tool called tenon.io, which is basically just a series of use case tests, and based on those use case tests, you get results on certain issues, who they impact, how impactful they are, and whatnot. Alternatively, if you wanted to get a little bit more of a hands-on test, you could unplug your mouse and run any website through just keyboard navigation. It'll give you a good idea of people that use trackballs or people that use different types of assistive technologies that's outside of the mouse keyboard setup. Depending on your experience with just the keyboard, you can kind of get a good idea of what other people are using, how difficult it may be for them. So those are a couple of easy things that developers can do right off the bat. Sorry, tenon.io is tenon.io.
All right, cool. So it just seems like there's a lot of cool stuff out there if you really want to get into it. I mean, I think in this 1.5 an hour conversation, we've probably listed 20 different tools that you can use for accessibility and testing. So
I got two more I can list real quick.
and
There's a tool
you have
called
to use all of
Totally.
them, just all the tools.
There's a tool called Totally that's pretty cool. It's just like this JavaScript file you can put on your page, and it's like a visualization toolkit. It's just this button that's get added to your page, and it pops up and it shows you color contrast ratios and checks your headings and links and stuff like that. And then there is Axe, which is this accessibility kind of API of sorts, not really, from, it's more, I guess, it's a library, from Deek. And it too is a JavaScript thing, and you embed that on your page, and it will return errors. So then you can take the errors and do whatever you want with them. It's kind of up to you to, like, I guess, build a UI for it, but it can be helpful if you've got some cases where you just need to console log out the errors and do something fun with it. So it kind of, that's really very, gives you some flexibility.
Yeah, there's another JavaScript one that I use sometimes from Squiz Labs with. Called HTML Code Sniffer. The link is, Roy, if you could post the link somewhere.
I always love that name every time you mention
it. But it works pretty well. It's just a quick little JavaScript bookmarklet, and it can be, it's not always 100% accurate. And it doesn't catch everything, but it's just, while you're browsing, you can click it and you can change sort of the level of that you're looking to validate against. So you can choose Section 508 or WCAG A, AA, or AAA, and it'll give you errors and warnings, and it'll point them out on the page as well. It's a pretty quick overview. But it's pretty useful, okay, especially for people that are just getting into it.
Yeah, all of the tools we are linking to on the on our podcast page. So if you're watching this later on, feel free to just go to the wpcrowd.com and check out the episode in the chat, and all the links will be there for all the tools we mentioned. So that's it for today. Thank you guys for being on. Awesome discussion. And hope to see you guys again soon.
Thanks, Roy.
Thank you.